Hello, everyone, and welcome to this first of the Meet the Community talks at SL11B. And tonight I'm talking to Gentle Heron of Virtual Ability, which is a very special community that has had a huge impact, I think, on Second Life and on people's real lives as well. Gentle, welcome.
Thank you, Saffia. It's always nice to be with you.
Well, it's always wonderful to talk to you too. And I was wondering if you could just give us a little background to start with about Virtual Ability, what it is, and how you came to set it up.
Sure. Virtual Ability is a cross-disability peer support community in the virtual world Second Life and other virtual worlds. So let me break that down and define each piece of that. Cross-disability means that unlike many other groups in Second Life, the American Cancer Society group, the Parkinson's group, the Alcoholics Anonymous groups, Virtual Ability is cross-disability, meaning that we serve people with all different kinds of disabilities and chronic illnesses. So some of our members have physical disabilities, some have mental disabilities, some have emotional disabilities, some have developmental disabilities, and some have sensory disabilities, deafness or blindness. So that's what cross-disability means. Peer support means that all of us who have disabilities, strive to support each other as fellow community members. We're not professionals. We do have professionals in our community, but they do not act professionally because of licensure issues. They can educate and they can be a peer supporter. So those are the key main concepts of our community here in Second Life.
I believe that you've actually partnered with professional organisations for events like conferences and so forth.
Oh, yes. We have two major professional conferences every year. The one in the spring is a mental health symposium, and the one in the fall is the International Disability Rights Affirmation Conference. And we've had speakers from all over the world, every continent except Antarctica, just like our membership in Virtual Ability. So we have a fairly broad reach in terms of geography, in addition to a very broad definition of disability and support.
That's fantastic. I'd say that being able to offer that worldwide context is something quite unique about virtual worlds.
It is. That's one of the wonderful things that I found here was the ability to make friends from everywhere. I would never have met you in my little corner of the world, and yet we can be friends here in this virtual world. That's really fun.
It is. And what's also fun is finding people here who actually are quite close to you geographically. As well as people who are a long, long way away, but who are very close in other ways.
Right, that's true. People with what we call low incidence disabilities, people with, for instance, Ehlers-Danlos, they may never meet in the physical world another person with that same set of symptoms.
Right.
But they can meet others here in the virtual world from other places geographically who share that live experience with them of that particular low incidence disability. That's a really important use of a virtual world.
I would say, presumably for some of the people who would want to come into Second Life, the very nature of their disability would make it very difficult for them to, for example, use a keyboard or use some of the tools of Second Life. Are there strategies that you've developed to cope with that or to help people?
Oh, yes. So far, we've not found anyone whose disability made it impossible for them to use Second Life. We have, for instance, a special adaptation of a viewer that allows a guardian of a person with very low mental functioning capabilities to set parameters for where they can go, who they can talk with, what they can do. So it can keep them safe, even though they may be nonverbal in the physical world. They can still enjoy going around in Second Life where they're allowed to go and clicking on things and having a lot of fun. You might think, because this is a highly visual environment, that people who are blind would have difficulty in here. And we have a third-party viewer that blind people use that was originally set up for low bandwidth machines. It's a text-only viewer.
Is that Radagast?
It is Radagast, and people can access Radagast's text using a screen reader. And we have a number of blind members in our community who just love Second Life. They go to events and they go shopping and do all kinds of stuff, just like everybody else.
That's fantastic. It's wonderful that it can be used by such a wide range of people. You sometimes think, it's largely people with high-end machines with good graphics cards are the only people who can use Second Life. But it seems you're able to reach out to a wide variety of people this way. Well,
you do, if you're going to use the graphics. I mean, everybody who's in Second Life knows that it's a pretty heavy-duty, graphics-intensive program. And so you do need to have a good high-end graphics card if you're going to use the graphics. And most people do use the graphics. And then if you add on top of that assistive technology, so if someone is using voice-to-text or text-to-voice or some other kind of assistive technology software, that can be a real problem because those are memory hogs too. So what we try and do is to teach people the strategies that anybody can use, like setting your draw distance lower. That's always helpful.
Well, you've also done some pioneering work really in Second Life about how to design places with different disabilities in mind.
Yes. We have a publication on universal design for virtual worlds, and that is one of the things that we try to model in the builds on all of our islands. We don't put little blue wheelchair symbols up to say this area is handicap accessible. We want all of our areas to be handicap accessible, and we try and make them as accessible as possible. So for instance, at our events, when speakers are speaking in voice, we have a transcriber who will then type what they're saying so that our deaf community members can see what is going on auditorily in voice in near real time. And what we found with a lot of our assistive technology and a lot of our adaptations is that when we make an adaptation for one set of community members, it helps other community members. So we found that having text in addition to a voiced presentation has been helpful to, for instance, people whose first language isn't English, because for many people who are learning something in a second language, it's easier to learn it in text than it is auditorily, because they can scroll back up and review, and it's a lot easier to get a translator to work on text. We've also found that the text adaptation, which we originally intended for deaf people, is helpful for people with attention disorders because they can remain focused on the text and the voice at the same time. It helps them to have both kinds of input. And then just, a person who's interrupted during a session, or a person whose baby starts hollering in the background, they can get up and go take care of whatever it is and then come back to their computer and scroll up. So it's very helpful to have the transcript in text of voiced sessions.
So can you tell me a little about the kind of sessions and the kind of activities that Virtual Ability offers its members?
I'm glad that you mentioned offers its members, because we have two types of activities. We have public activities where what we're trying to do is to educate the general public, and especially to let the general public know that people with disabilities have abilities in addition to their disabilities, and we want to focus on the abilities. But for our own members, we have both educational and entertainment events. We have those probably about one every day, sometimes more than one. But these will range from things like we have a former phys ed teacher who teaches a exercise session once a week for people who are seated. Now, this is another example of universal design. I'm a seated person because I use a power wheelchair. Mm-hmm. But you are also a seated person because you're presumably sitting down at your computer. And it's nice that we can have exercises that we can all do together. So that's an activity. We have a show and tell that is really fun. Every week we gather and share with each other fun places that we've found in the past week, or things that we've made, or things we've bought that are kind of fun. It's a great way to learn about the other parts of Second Life that we may not have yet had time to explore. And we have a real-world chef who was talking to us about nutrition. She has a series of lessons that she's giving us. We have an herb garden on our Health Info Island, and we have occasional lectures about various herbs in terms of what is the research, the medical research about their benefits, what are the folk benefits, how are these herbs used in folk medicine, and some good recipes. So we have a lot of variety. And of course, we have parties. We, as a community, really enjoy our parties.
Now, something that I think you're well known for is the training that you offer to new residents.
Yes.
In Worlds. That has always been spoken of very highly, and I've seen it, and I think it's absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. That was one of the first services that we offered to the general public and to our own community, our new resident orientation center on Virtual Ability Island. We designed that skills training pathway to be modular, to be spiral, so that you repeat what you learned in the first task as you're learning the second task, so you get to practice a little bit. We used the principles of universal design to work on the design of that pathway. It teaches the very basic skills of how to use Second Life, how to run your avatar, and at the end there's changing rooms full of free clothing, free new looks, so that you can adapt your avatar and make it a little more personalized. We even offer free wheelchairs because many people who've been in wheelchairs most of their lives identify with the wheelchair. It's part of their personality. And so as all of us use our avatars to express our persons, when people want to have a wheelchair and express that part of their personality, then they can get a free one at the end of our new resident orientation center.
That's fantastic. And you also, going to the other extreme, teach people how to fly. I think you've got a fantastic flying exercise, I remember.
Yes, that has kind of an interesting history. When we first came into Second Life, before we even had our island, we were teaching other people with disabilities that were coming into Second Life all the basic skills. And when you first teach someone to fly, often they will fly really fast, really far away, and then they get lost and they get frustrated, and some of them get frightened, and they don't know how to come back to you, and it's can be just a real problem. So when we designed the course, we were thinking, well, how do we teach people to fly? We'll put them in a cage. And then we thought, no, nobody wants to be in a cage. So we had used butterflies as part of our motif of teaching people to use their camera skills. They were looking around over a pond at butterflies. So we made a butterfly pavilion that you fly up, across, and down. That's where you practice your flying skills. It's inside an enclosed area. You can bump the ceiling. It's a glass ceiling. You won't get hurt. You can sit down on the bridge that's over the road and use your camera skills and look around at the butterflies. So there's, again, the spiral curriculum is built in, that the things that you've learned before you can still use. You learned to walk forwards, backwards, sideways. You do that when you fly as well. The only additional skill for flying is jumping up.
Right. Were you actually part of the Community Gateway program?
Yes, we were. That was quite a while ago. You remember that?
Vividly.
Yeah, the
And
Community
the
Gateway
ending
was
of
one of
it.
those. It was one of those excellent programs that Second Life started and then failed to continue. But yes, we were part of the Community Gateway and the Resident Help Network as well. We were part of both of those.
Did that sort of, was it joining the Community Gateway, or you'd already got the program going before that started?
Oh yes, yes. We One of the reasons that we won the first Linden Prize in 2009 was the effectiveness of our new resident orientation center. And the new resident orientation center was part of our Community Gateway. So yes, it predated that.
Right. Having said that, have there been any other Linden Prizes? I remember the first one vividly, but I don't remember any others.
I believe there was a second, and then nothing happened after that. I'm sorry that they weren't able to continue that.
Yes, one of their other good ideas that didn't go very far.
Yes.
Okay. Can I ask, what's the relationship between the Second Life community Virtual Ability and the Real Non-World Profit Virtual Ability Incorporated?
Oh, that's a really good question, because I think a lot of people inside Second Life don't realize that there is another piece of virtual ability. That piece is a nonprofit. In the United States, we call it a 501c3. I think in some European countries that would be considered an NGO. We are a tax-exempt organization. If people donate to us in the U.S., they can receive a tax credit. The reason that we have this real-world nonprofit, and it was created after we created our Second Life work, but the reason the real-world nonprofit exists is so that we can support our Second Life work. So the real-world nonprofit is a legal entity. It can enter into contracts with other legal entities like universities and do work for them, and that's why we have that.
I know you've been involved in a number of really interesting projects with real life places. Before we go into many of those, I'd like to talk about one that you've been recently involved with the University of Western Australia.
Oh, yes.
Inside Second Life. Can you tell us a little about what you've been doing there?
Oh, that was very exciting, and JJ gets all the credit for this one. A couple of disability organizations and the University of Western Australia put on an art exhibit, and this art exhibit was highlighting the work of persons with disabilities. The theme was freedom, and the idea was to show how virtual worlds offer these people with disabilities a sense of freedom. And as with all art shows, there's so many different ways that could be interpreted. But it was really exciting to see the high quality of artwork that was involved in a lot of those pieces that were on display. It was wonderful.
There was some amazing stuff there. I went to see it myself, and I was very impressed. And
yes.
What was also true, some of the pieces were incredibly moving.
Yes.
And many were very, very beautiful.
Yes. Yeah. One that really struck me, we have been trying for a long time for our deaf community to create a way to have sign language in Second Life, because for some of our deaf community members, English is not their first language. Sign language in the U.S., American Sign Language, in other countries they have their own different versions of sign language, but American Sign Language is not the same as English. The words are the same, but the grammar is very different. So when a person with a first language of American Sign Language types in Second Life, many people assume that their disability is that they are mentally disabled because their sentence structure just doesn't make sense. But the truth of the matter is that we're not understanding their language, which is American Sign Language. So it would be great if we could sign, but if you look at your avatar hands, they're little plastic doll hands. They're not going to be able to make all the shapes for sign language. So we sort of gave up on that project. But one of the displays at the Freedom Art Festival at the University of Western Australia was done by a deaf woman who created some very large hands and animated them and had them move in the American Sign Language symbol for freedom.
Oh,
I was
wonderful.
so impressed by that.
That's wonderful. Yes, it's yes, the hands are tricky. Even if you've gone for the new mesh hands, they're pretty much frozen into one of several positions. So don't have the flexibility with your fingers and things.
Right.
I always think it's a shame that American and British Sign Language are so very different. So although English, British English and American English are largely the same when we can talk to each other.
Well, you know what they say about American English and British English. They say America and the UK are two countries separated by a common language.
This is true, yes.
But American Sign Language derived from French Sign Language, not from British Sign Language. There's a history to the reason why they're so different. American Sign Language is much more similar to French Sign than it is to British Sign.
Oh, is there a reason? Why did they choose French? Was it, do you know?
Gallaudet, who was French, did a lot of pioneering work on education of children who were deaf. And he had some acolytes in the United States who took up his method of educating deaf children. And that's where the American Sign Language grew out of, basically from a French format.
That's brilliant. That's really interesting. I never knew that. So you are involved as well as being involved in the art project. You've got several other projects going on now. I was wondering if you could tell us about those.
Oh, sure. We fund our Second Life existence by doing contract work, and a lot of our contract work is research work with universities. So we have 3 really large projects that are going on right now that are research projects. We have one called Virtual Health Adventures that's with Nova Southeastern University. This one is a peer research project that we're working on with training amputees to use prosthetics, and we're comparing training them with a CD versus training them in the virtual world. We have to provide the same information to both groups, but in the virtual world, we can also provide them with 3-dimensional models that they can walk around and look at, and we can provide them with virtual prosthetics that they can try on with their avatar and be animated to see what it's like to try and sit in a chair if you have a leg prosthetic, or to try and get in and out of bed that way. So that's what that research project is about. Our second research project is a continuation of a project we've had several years ago with the U.S. Army. We created an amputee virtual environment support space, and now they're taking that into OpenSim. And what we're doing is we're modifying that not for amputees, but for people with traumatic brain injury. So we're creating an environment in OpenSim where a therapist could use everyday environments like a store or a campsite or something to evaluate the skills of a person who has had a traumatic brain injury, to see if they can follow a sequence of steps to accomplish a task, to see what their memory is, to see what their level of disturbance is when people are around and bump into them, or talk when they're trying to talk, whatever. So that's really useful for diagnosis, but it can also, the same environments can be used for therapy to help teach people coping skills, so that even though they do have a traumatic brain injury and will continue to have problems with it, they can learn to live a more independent life. So that's our second one. And our third one is called Mrs. A and Mr. B. This is a project that is with the University of Pennsylvania Medical School. Mrs. A and Mr. B are not real persons. They stand for sort of generic persons with disabilities. This is a very complicated research project. It's called a mixed methods project. The university takes statistical data on people who have Medicare and Medicaid. It looks at whether people with larger degrees of disability, people who are more disabled, do they have more trouble getting good quality health care? Do they decline in terms of their level of independence faster than people who are not disabled? Are they more likely to be institutionalized and put in a nursing home? Are they more likely to die than a person who does not have a disability? So they look at the statistics, they run the numbers. And then the cool part for us in terms of Second Life and virtual ability is that we bring their interpretations into this world and hold focus groups to discuss their interpretations. So we are providing the I guess you could say the validation of their statistical information. I could give you an example of this. This is actually what started all of this. As you would guess, people with disabilities have a harder time getting good quality health care. Their health tends to decline quicker than a person who doesn't have a disability. They're more likely to be institutionalized and die. But there was one group of people that the statisticians found, a very small group of people who had pretty severe disabilities, but they did better, way better than would be expected. And so they thought, because this is a huge group, they are what are called outliers. These people either didn't answer correctly or whatever, and so they were just going to throw that data away. And we said, whoa, stop, no, these are important people. It's very likely that these people got such poor quality health care that they became so angry with the poor quality health care that they decided to do research on their own. And so they looked on the internet and they found alternative methods for treatment and they tried out different things. That's probably why their outcomes are better, is because they were better at self-advocating. And the statisticians said, oh, we never thought of that. So this is why it's so important for us to have these focus groups and to have the input of people with disabilities into this project.
Right.
But the really fun thing about this is that within Second Life, all of the research staff are people with disabilities. We found people in our community that we trained and hired to lead the focus groups, to de-identify the data, to do all of that kind of work. So this is one of the important things that virtual ability does, is to try and develop the skills of people within the community and then hire them so that they have this on their employment record.
And presumably once they've done stuff like that in world, they have the capability to go and do it in the real world to an extent.
Absolutely. Not only the capability, but they have references and they can put this on their resume.
That's fantastic. So you're sort of building people's career.
We're hoping we can help start some of their careers, yes. Yeah, it's difficult. People with disabilities are undereducated, they're underemployed, they tend to be closer to the poverty line. It's very difficult.
I'm afraid that this isn't being this particular talk isn't being transcribed. I'm really sorry. It is being recorded, and you will be able to watch it and perhaps listen to it with a much louder volume.
Right, and if we were doing this within virtual ability, we would have a transcriber. And Lady Slipper is helping. That's great. And Saffia is typing too. She can type and talk at the same time. I cannot type and talk at the same time. It's one or the other with me.
Well, I'm falling silent while I type. Okay, you. One of the things you raised with the U.S. Army project,
Yes.
that made me smile because I was remembering my own father, who had a very debilitating stroke, and was assessed after it. And he lost a lot of language, and and had real difficulties with language, among other things. So he went and they gave him an array of tests. And he was telling me about it. He said first they gave me an English test, and they were slightly doubtful about my spelling, but I said that it had always been like that. And then they gave me a maths test, and he'd always been brilliant at maths. And he said, and they were really, really pleased with me. And then they asked me to draw a simple picture. And he was notorious in the family for not being able to draw a straight line. So it was like, I said, oh, Dad, they must have thought that you were really badly affected after seeing that.
Yes. And so that's why we use everyday life tasks to evaluate people with traumatic brain injury. Can they follow the directions so that they can cook from a recipe? Can they find things from a grocery store list and put them in their grocery cart? Can they follow directions to get from one place to another geographically? Those are the types of life skills that we can evaluate.
Right. The other thing that interests me about that project, you said you were on OpenSim.
Yes.
Do you have a presence in other virtual worlds as well? Or is it just OpenSim and Second Life?
We also have an island in InWorlds called Beacon Bay. We don't do a lot of activities in InWorlds, but we have a community over there as well.
And have you found that quite a few people have joined up there?
Well, Beacon Bay is small. It's a residential sim, and we generally have it full. But in terms of virtual ability members, not very many are over there. But then again, InWorlds is much smaller than Second Life. So I think as InWorlds grows, more and more people will be in virtual ability in InWorlds. And there is a gentle Heron in InWorlds as well.
Right, just as there's a Saffia Widdershins. Now, you've been involved in research projects in the past. I was wondering if you could tell me something about some of the past projects you've been involved in.
Oh, I'd be happy to. One of the first research projects that we were involved in that was how we set up the model where we would train and employ people from the disability community. We evaluated the accessibility of online course materials, textbooks and other course materials for a consortium of community colleges. And you know that the paper and cardboard textbooks are sort of becoming archaic. Everything's online, ebooks and all this stuff. But is that accessible? And we found that it wasn't to many people with different kinds of disabilities. But that set us on the path of training people from the virtual ability community to do the accessibility evaluations and to write the reports. Then we also had, it has just ended, a really interesting project with the University of Hawaii called Employ Able, where we used the virtual world to give pre-employment skill training to people with disabilities, focusing on veterans mainly, but other people as well. So teaching people things like, how do you set up your resume? How do you present yourself at an interview? Even things like, how do you find job openings? These are all skills that can be taught very well in Second Life. And many people really enjoyed working with the mock interviews in Second Life. It made them feel a lot more comfortable when they went to the real interviews for their first time.
I can imagine. I must say that running simulated job interviews would be extremely useful for many people in Second Life.
Oh, yes. And not just that, but you can, you know that you can do machinima in Second Life. So you can film the mock interview, and then your mentor, your teacher, can go over the interview with you and say, now here's a place where you really did a great job of answering that question. Oops, you kind of blew that one. You probably should have said something a little bit different. And this is especially important for people with disabilities that are visible. So for instance, if I wheel into the interview room and the interviewer goes, oh, then I have to handle myself a little bit differently than if I walked in, because they're not going to gasp when they see me walking into an interview as they would when I wheel in my wheelchair.
I was going to say, I don't know, attractive woman, they may be gasping.
No, I don't think so. Most people, this is a very natural thing. When you deal with people in wheelchairs, a lot of times, if you're with an attendant, if you have a care attendant with you, the person that's talking to you doesn't look at you. They look at and speak to your attendant over your head, which sort of negates the sense that you're an actual person. If you were to sit near me, you would sit farther away from me if you had a choice of seats. If I was in a wheelchair than if I were in a chair, you would sit closer to me. There are a number of just things like that that occur that kind of naturally, but it's a little bit off-putting, and it's a problem for people when you're trying to interview and present yourself as a capable interviewee, and the first thing someone sees is that wheelchair.
Yeah. Rather than seeing you, you've got to overcome that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Wow. That's very interesting. I know that. Have you done any work with Dave Commerce of Imperial?
Oh, yeah. I haven't worked with him, but we certainly follow his work. Yes.
Because I know
We
he's
loved it.
done
We've
some
taken field
interesting
trips.
things.
Yeah. Oh, he's done some great stuff.
I thought you were kind of moving in parallel on some things. Some of the research projects he's been doing. So, do you have any plans for the future? What's coming up for virtual ability?
Well, one of the things that you'll notice about us is that we are a long-time, stable, growing community, very active. You'll see a lot of virtual ability people here at SL11B in a variety of roles, from greeters to the members of our community who donated artwork for our display. We have Lady Slipper is, I believe, the head of volunteers for SL11B, and she's one of our community members. So we're very active in many different areas of Second Life. We don't just stick to ourselves. So we will continue to do that.
Yes, I saw Ice Sky Silverweb on the volunteer list, and I believe she's another of your members, isn't she?
She is, and if you look out in the audience, you'll see Ruby, who's a SIM coordinator. She's in Virtual Ability. You'll see quite a few people. Fran is a Virtual Ability member, and she's a moderator for SL11B. So, yeah, we're very active.
That's brilliant. What I'm going to do now is ask if anyone here has any questions. So we'll have a short question and answer session. So if anyone has any questions, would they like to ask them now? You have the most silent keyboard, you know. When I type, I hear clatter, clatter, clatter.
Oh, good. Guana asks, is there some way I could get a text version of this later?
I don't think we will be able to offer it.
And Penumbra says, I came here late. What is your project within Second Life? And our community is named Virtual Ability.
Pet, could you type the address where people, or Zoe perhaps, could you type the address where people will be able to see this later? Or Mal? You will be able to watch it later on Meta World Broadcasting. Someone can type the exact address in. That would be wonderful. Oh, wonderful.
Penumbra asks, how has Second Life changed your life? My life changed when my multiple sclerosis kicked into high gear, and I could no longer be employed. I could no longer be a volunteer in my community. I could no longer do things with my children, help out with their schooling. That's when life made a 180-degree turn for me. And I began looking for other ways that I could be sociable. I had no way to get out and see friends. I couldn't do anything. So I turned to the virtual world for that socialization. And I came to realize that there was a lot that could happen in a virtual world. And that's when Second Life became a part of my first life. I don't consider them separate anymore. Does that answer your question, Penumbra? Yeah, for a lot of us, I agree. It's important for a lot of us.
Well, we're coming towards the top of the hour now, so I'm going to say thank you very much to Gentle Heron of Virtual Ability for this talk. Tomorrow we will be having 3 talks here under the auspices of Prim Perfect. We're organising a series of talks. Lots of events going on in the auditorium all the time. You can check them out on the SL11B community website. Tomorrow, our talks, the designer talks, is going to be with the group Mesh Creative. Mesh Creative are involved in producing mesh furniture, mesh clothes, and other things, and they will be coming and talking about their work here tomorrow. That's at 2 p.m. At 4 p.m. there is an art talk. Bryn Darkley Cazalet of Tart Gallery will be talking about her own art style and events for people to create their own art with photographs in Second Life. And at 5 p.m. this time, there will be another Meet the Community talk. We'll be talking to people who have set up communities that are based on real-life locations. We will have Ham Rambler of Dublin, with any luck, Second Life Dublin. In real life, he's in the Maldives. Poor thing. Poor thing. And we should have someone from Second Life London. The talks will be here in the auditorium, yes. I'm not sure they'll all be on this stage, but they will be here in the auditorium. And we hope to see as many of you as possible, because I think these talks are going to be fun. Okay, so thank you very much. If you want to stay and see something else, I believe that there is a display by Second Life cheerleaders going on in the big stage behind us for the next hour. So if you want to stay, they should be starting their performance at the top of the hour.